This podcast contains potentially adult language, adult themes, definitely drinking, and possibly sexual context. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Drinking with Authors, the podcast. I am your host, Erica Lance. My co-host today is the amazing C.R. Rice, and our guest today is Ann Shepphird. Woo! 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 Insert woo track that producer does. Okay. First, I have to say our sponsor on today's podcast is Skunk Brothers Spirits. Skunk Brothers Spirits is a veteran-owned, family-owned distillery in Washington State. And they make amazing beverages, which I keep partaking in. So they're awesome. And if you use coupon code DWA10, you get 10% off. And recognize that we are talking about their beverages. So that's where we're at there. But today I'm going a little rogue because I had some of this Flat Rock Ice Spice Baby, which is cranberry cider. I have a little bit of it left because it's only when Christmas time, and it also has the story of Ice Ice Baby on the can, which makes me very, very happy. So that's what I'm drinking tonight. CR, what are you drinking?
I am doing green tea and vodka still because I'm being healthy this year. So exactly. That's what I'm doing.
You need to come up with a name for this drink so that like that we copyright that on the show.
I gotta come up with something like punny, or I'll have to ask Corey. He's really good at like the punny stuff, and see if he can come up with some crazy name.
He needs to, because I'm telling you, it's going to be stolen from us. Anne, what are you drinking?
I am drinking, this is a Negroni Spagliati. So if you've ever heard of the Negroni, right, which is the gin and Campari and vermouth. Yes. This is kind of a version with sparkling wine instead of the gin. So.
Right.
Did you invent that, or did you find
No, it's a real drink. It's actually a real drink.
Okay.
What happened was I was watching, I don't know, I'm sure everybody saw the video where Stanley Tucci made the Negroni, right? And I'm like, that sounds great. And then I don't really love gin drinks. So I thought, okay. And so you kind of Google, and I tend to like sparkling wine drinks in general. Sometimes I make them with grapefruit and other, and Campari, or add other kind of things to it. So yeah.
You're super fancy in comparison to us. I opened a can. That's what I did.
It's fun. Well, Trader Joe's has the little cans of Italian sparkling wine, which is nice because you can just make one. Yeah, the problem sometimes with Prosecco drinks is you don't want to drink a whole bottle, right? So Trader Joe's has the little cans, and a little can, little Campari, little vermouth, boom, done. So
it's so funny you bring up Stan Tucci, because I was visiting my daughter because she had a daughter. So now I'm a Mima. But we watched Burlesque that has Stan Tucci. And then I was like, what do you want to watch next? And she's like, Easy A. We ended up in a series of movies.
Love that movie.
Yes, but not intentionally with Stanley Tucci. I love him. He's great. Absolutely, there's no role that he ever does that I don't completely love him in.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to know something weird we did? We did a Ryan Reynolds movie weekend unintentionally. Because I love his movie Just Friends. Like, it's my number one movie. I've seen it a million times, know every word. And then we were like, oh, Deadpool 2 is on HBO, and you can't just watch the second one. You have to do the first one.
Yeah.
And then we ended up going into so we did 1 and 2, and then we did R.I.P.D. and it ended up being a Ryan Reynolds movie weekend.
Nice.
We could watch Green Lantern. It was at that point we were dedicated.
You just literally lost off credibility.
That's hardcore. That would be a hardcore fan.
Yeah, we were dedicated at that point. You can't.
Yeah. You were pot committed, as we say in poker.
Yeah.
Okay, and now that we've gone on a whole entire binge about Stan Tucci and Ryan Reynolds, tell the people who are listening what you write that may not know you.
Okay, so I have 2 books out. They are both the first in a series. So the first one is called The War Council, and it falls under romantic comedy, but my cousin calls it a caper, because it's more satiric look at love and relationships and things like that. And that's the first in a romantic comedy series. It's called The University Chronicles. The second book is the first in the Destination Murder Mysteries, and it's called Destination Maui. And it's based on my 20 plus years as a working travel writer. And so it's about a travel writer who solves mysteries on her trips. So the first one takes place in Maui. So those
all of this is awesome, which leads into the next question. When did you start writing?
I think I've always written in one way or another growing up. So the book that made me want to be a writer was The World According to Garp. I read The World According to Garp and I wanted to be Garp, because Garp in the book, essentially, he has this great life, right? Really writes in the morning and then he goes and does the wrestling in the afternoon. I'm like, I want that life. That is like a perfect, you know what I mean? It's like,
you wanted to go do wrestling in the afternoon. You're like,
wrestling, but I liked the variety in his life, right? You know, so I'm a tennis player, so I like that. You know, you can write in the morning, play tennis in the afternoon, or whatever it is you want to do. There just was a nice mix of life in there. So, and I've always written in one way or another. I've made, my living as a writer for my whole writing career. So yeah, so now it's novels. Before it was magazines, and before that I worked in the film industry actually. So yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. What do you do in the film industry?
I got my master's in film, and then I was what they call a reader, or worked in development, where I read books and scripts and then wrote coverage to tell people whether or not they should be made into movies. So
oh, you were a gatekeeper. Oh.
I was. And for some of them, I just was the no person. So I read a lot of dreck. I read a lot of really, really, really bad screenplays. But sometimes I would read books for them, which I actually loved doing, because the books were always better than the screenplays in general.
I think that it's always the case for the most part. I will say that. I mean, it's interesting because we've talked about this on the podcast with other authors, but I am not a huge fan when they take books and make them into movies. I'm not a huge fan when they do that, because I feel like you lose some of the story, but then you realize you can't tell all of the story in the movie because there's not enough time to tell all of the story.
And
did you ever say yes and green light some fun movies that we would know?
No, although the one that I hated that they ended up making and made a lot of money was The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. I don't know if you remember.
Oh my gosh, Rebecca De Mornay. Yes, I know what you're talking about.
I found it to be just the most sexist piece of drivel on the page. I just hated it, and then they bought it, made it to a movie, and it made all sorts of Sleeping with the Enemy. I read, what are some of the other ones I read? Mostly I read a lot of dreck. Yeah.
Are we allowed to consider you an expert witness now?
I'm sorry, what?
Do we get to count you as like an expert witness now? Because like you've worked in that field, so that when people try to say that like the book was worse than the movie or whatever, we can be like, excuse me, hold on 1 second. We'll bring in an expert.
Right. Maybe. Yeah. The other one I read was Silence of the Lambs. I read the book, and it was a great book, but in those days, this tells you how much though TV and film has changed, because when it first came out, I read it and I'm like, they are never they wanted me to read it for the TV department of a company. And I'm like, they are never going to make a TV movie about a guy who skins his victims. I'm like, that's no big deal. Right. I mean, it's like, oh, whatever, so, but yeah. That was a fun one.
It's definitely interesting how things progressed. I say that CR's younger than the both of us, but I say that because I remember what you couldn't do and what you couldn't say on TV. Like I remember when you couldn't swear on TV unless it was literally cable TV. There isn't cable TV the way there used to be. Like I remember, this is gonna date. I remember when HBO came out and like they put movies and they had cuss words and it was like huge, and you'd get this R rating if you had cuss words and sex, and now like I don't even know what you have to do to get an R rating anymore on a movie.
I know.
Like I just kind of go, do you just ask and go, could you put an R rating on our movie because we want to say it's an R-rated movie?
Right, exactly. Yeah. I think there's from what I understand, when they give those ratings, it's like how many cuss words are in there, how much, if there's nudity, how much the nudity is. Full frontal immediately gets you an X, or that was the old days, but there's still those lines that they won't cross.
I was gonna say full frontal's PG-13 these days. So
I know.
we're
Well, not male.
Yeah, like anything on freaking TV. Like, yeah, exactly. Like you can have a girl hanging everything out and it's like,
But not guys.
whatever. But
Yeah.
a guy
The minute
hangs
you
out,
show
it's
the
like,
guys.
hold on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And
Okay,
for years, like violence was fine, but not nudity, right? So you can blow someone's head off, but you can't have sex with them, then you get it,
you can kill them in really bizarre ways, but you're not allowed to fornicate with them.
Exactly. Yes.
That was our line. We had a line.
Yes, well, exactly.
That line has been turned into such a hazy kind of wavy thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you moved to be a travel writer. How did you do that transition?
Yes. Well, I was working in the film industry for a while, and I soon learned to hate the film industry. It's mostly the people aren't very happy in the film industry, and so I thought, well, how else does a writer make a living? And I answered this ad for small magazine needs, administrative help. And I was like, well, I don't really want to do admin work, but I'll apply for this job. And the guy hired me, said, oh my God, I think you have a great background. I'd love to train you to be an editor. And I said, oh, okay. So it was a small travel trade magazine, what they call travel trade magazine. So this particular magazine went to meeting planners. So people who plan meetings for, you name it. And it was for associations. So it's like, I say everything from knitters to lawyers to you name it, there's an association, and what they have in common is they meet. Well, like booksellers, right? Or everybody. And so there's someone who plans that meeting. So they book a lot of hotel rooms. So the travel industry loves those magazines. So suddenly I was going on these great trips. They invite you to come on these trips to check out their hotel or check out their destination, and we get to write about it. So after, as everyone knows, when you're in Hollywood, they treat writers like dirt, and suddenly I'm being treated like royalty. I'm like, I like this business. This is really fun. I'm really enjoying this. So, yeah.
That's very cool. And so what made you decide to make the transition into fiction?
I actually had written the War Council. I actually first wrote decades ago when I was right out of graduate school. And then I got the job at the magazine. So it kind of went on a shelf, because one of the things that I am terrible at is marketing myself. And so I sent it around a little bit and then kind of got the job, and, life took off and I started traveling again. And then when the company I worked for got bought by a bigger publishing company, and so my job was eliminated 5 years ago. So I pulled the War Council back off the shelf and did a big rewrite and started sending. I had to change a lot of things because suddenly, 20 years difference. I had one scene that was a big pivot point, was she goes home and there's, a voice on the answering machine. And I'm like, oh, we don't have answering machines anymore, and like there was one like phone booths, no phone booths. All right. You had to throw in some social media things like that. So I updated it and then started shopping it. And then in the meantime, while I was doing the travel writing, I had the idea for the Destination Mystery Series because I was on a trip, and the trip started at the Algonquin Hotel in New York City. And then we were taking these restored rail cars up to Montreal. So the first night, and what they do in the travel industry is they invite a bunch of writers on these trips. So you're kind of thrown together, to go on a trip together. So we go to dinner at the Algonquin Round Table, right? So it's this historic place, and we're sitting there, and there's about 10 of us sitting around the table. And there is this one woman who is the most obnoxious person I've ever to this day met. I mean, she was just awful. So I got up to my room in the hotel and I called my husband and I said, oh my God, this woman on the trip is so awful. And he said, oh, so if there's a murder on the train, I know who it'll be. And I thought, what a great idea for a book. So the idea was born then. And then when I finally had time, when my job ended, I started working on it.
That's very, very cool. So how was it different for you, for instance, doing the Hollywood writing versus doing travel writing?
The thing about Hollywood, right? Well, the thing about scripts and things like that is you're only doing a blueprint of something that will happen. And I learned this in film school when I got my master's degree, because we all had to make a film. And so you have and it was based on so I took a short story, I turned it into a script, and then I made a film. So that I learned it completely changed in the editing process, so that they were all three completely different animals. And that's what you kind of learn, is that when you write books, you get to write the whole world. It's all you, right? It's all your universe. When you write in Hollywood, you're really writing for someone else to take it and turn it into something, if that makes sense. So
absolutely. And how is that different than from writing for like a magazine for the travel and stuff like that?
That one, I mean, they're similar, and essentially that one's kind of, because it's more journalism style writing. Essentially, I would go on a trip and I'm always it's similar in that you're always looking for the hook. You're always looking for, what is that, if I go to a hotel or I go to a destination, it's like, what makes it special? What sets it apart from other things? What is the hook for that place? And the other thing we always looked for were theme stories. So if I would start to see, like, I'd go to 3 or 4 different hotels and it's like, oh, everyone's put in a spa or everyone's put in a juice bar. And so you start to look for those themes that you can cover in the magazine. So, and the biggest difference though is the word count, obviously. So that's what it's like most of my stories were like 2,000 words, right? So now it's 50,000 words. And so you have to, like, when I would, and I did a lot of freelance writing for other magazines, and it's like, all right, so if I have to write a 2,000 word story, I do all maybe the research for it. I talk to all the people, I get all the information. And then I have the one bad day for the rough draft, because whenever you're doing a rough draft, it's just horrible, right? You're throwing, it's like, oh, this is terrible, but I'm going to throw it in there. Well, with a book, it's 2 months of, oh, this is horrible, but I'm going to throw it in there and fix it later, kind of. So.
You find it easier to write shorter stories than longer stories?
It's more the pain part is truncated. You know what I mean? It's just a shorter. I think it's just the cycle is shorter. That's the difference.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Yeah. From beginning to end, it's like a 5-day cycle versus a 6-month cycle. So that's. Yeah.
CR is asking because she cannot write a story that's not at least 25,000 words long. She cannot help herself and cannot stop herself. So that is why she's asking that question.
I'll say though, the last couple times I was really close to 25,000. I was only slightly over. I'm getting better.
Yeah, I'm just saying that that's still not a short story. That's a novella. Like a short story generally is under 10,000 words. Usually somewhere between 2 and 5. I know. Like, could you even do that?
How do you even do a whole
5,000?
I'm going to practice.
Story?
I'm going to do it. I'm going to practice.
To me, that would mean maybe break it into smaller stories, right? It was a $25,000 word story. Woo! Could be like 2 or 3 great short stories, right? I would find a nugget, especially as a magazine editor, when I used to have to go in and fix people's stories, it was like, all right, again, where's the nugget that really works? Let's concentrate on that, and we'll move we can use that later. You always have to pretend you're going to use the material later. Like, I'm just going to move this off to another file, and that kind of teases you into thinking that you can cut it and not feel like you're cutting off your arm.
I will cut off people's arms. So.
Well, exactly, but you pretend it's like when you're cleaning out your closet, right? That's what I used to say. Like, editing for the magazine is like cleaning out someone's garage, right? And first you have to take out the big chunks, and then you start sweeping. By the time you sweep the corners, you've gotten everything out of there. But first you have to maybe take the car out and take the bout out and take the bike out, and then you can start to find the stuff to whittle down.
I'm just saying, this is something you have to work on. Like,
I'm the opposite. I go and they'll tell me 80,000 words because mine are about 80,000. And like,
I think you're being a little bit generous when you say about 80,000, because they're more like 100,000.
Oh my God.
No, but I do. I cut them. I'll go and I'll message her and I'll be like, hey, so is 125 okay? And she's like, no, 80. And I'm like, okay. So then I move it to the next book and I'm like, okay, how about 110? And she's like, no, 80. And I'm like, okay. So then I move more. I think it's so much harder, at least for me, to make the shorter stories, because I end up coming up with so much that has to like tie in because I have the whole world, that I think it's so hard. I don't get how people do it.
There's an art, and I've said this on the show before, is that I think, and it's interesting, I did a seminar on shameless self-promotion, right? And I was talking about doing a giveaway story. Like, you should have a giveaway story, but your giveaway story should be 25,000 words, maybe 5, but 2,500, sorry, words, 5,000 words, somewhere in there. Is the sweet spot for a giveaway story. But I also think it hones an author's skills to do short stories. And I think a lot of authors that are doing books and doing things like that could really benefit from researching what anthologies and stuff are out there and writing a short story that aligns with an anthology in the genres that they want to write, or even trying something new. Because telling a short story is really telling one moment in time, one brief, like, little piece of it. And I think a lot of authors tend to want to describe everything that happened before, everything that happened after, and all the other characters. And none of that matters for the short story that you're trying to say. I think it's something that authors should practice, is all I'm saying, is that I think it's a skill set that one should have. But if you do it too much, then you have a problem writing a book. So, because I know some authors that are just short story authors, because they can write 10,000 words they will write 10,000 words. But when you're like, okay, cool, that needs to be 60,000 words, they're like, I don't even know what I'm going to talk about. Right. So it goes both directions, my friend. It goes both directions. Yeah. Okay. We are going to take a quick break while CR is pondering life, the universe, and short stories. And we will be right back with Drinking with Authors.
Sample locally sourced, quality distilled spirits in the beautiful Columbia River Gorge. At Skunk Brothers Distillery, we're family owned, brewing small batch grain to bottle spirits, just like our grandfather did back in the Prohibition era. From handcrafted bourbons and moonshine to flavored blends and cordials infused with local fruit. Join us for a tasting tour and buy Skunk Brothers spirits straight from the source.
It's all in the family at Skunk Brothers Spirits, located in Stevenson, Washington.
We're back. But anyway, as I was saying during break, microfiction stories. There are stories where you have 200 words to tell a story. Absolutely. It is basically a tweet, like, to tell an entire story. And there are competitions to tell entire little tiny stories like that. That's okay. You don't have to enter those competitions. Okay.
No. In the magazine world, because I did a lot of freelancing as well, and sometimes I would do for the big kind of New York women's magazines and stuff like that. And sometimes, man, the work they put into a 400-word piece, sometimes it was, a pain in the patootie, because essentially I would turn in the piece and they'd go, oh, I like it, first editor, but can you change X, Y? And I'm like, okay, I'll go change X, Y. And then the next editor goes, can you change, Z? And you go, okay, I changed it. And then you get to the top editor, like, well, why isn't this all in? I'm like, well, that was in my first draft. But it's like, that was 400 words. And I did 4 revisions of 400 words, it's like crazy. It's like, oh my God, okay.
No, that is completely bonkers. Okay. So you've gone into the fiction writing, you've got 2 books out. What made you not self-publish?
A few things. One is, again, I am horrible at marketing myself. I hate it. I don't like doing it. I wanted to put that in the hands of a publisher who knew what they were doing. And so, yeah, it was never really, for me, something that I was going to want to do. I also, I want to, write, and I like having a publisher who is there to support me and do the publishing stuff. So, it's like,
No, totally. I say that knowing that very well.
Exactly.
I think it's important to talk about that, though, because there are definitely, so many avenues you can go with publishing and doing stuff like that. And I think it speaks to somebody should never give up on wanting to be a published author. They just have to, depending on the route they choose, be willing to go through the steps that route takes.
Right.
Like sending your work out to be reviewed and waiting to hear back from publishers and stuff like that, which not all publishers are the greatest at communicating back. I'm just going to say that publishers listening to this podcast, work on your communication skills. You would hate it if you wanted something and somebody was like, I'm going to take 6 to 8 months to tell you that thing that you want to know.
Right.
So,
just a quick, like, sorry, not for us, like, or great, love it.
And
or I'm probably not going to read this, so no.
And it's very analogous to the magazine world, which obviously I spent 2 decades in. And it's kind of similar in that I liked being on staff, because as a staff writer and editor, you have a support system, right? I am here for this magazine. The freelance people, you're having to, scrape and scrap. Who am I writing for at this time? Or if I'm invited on this trip, and you don't always, and some people are really good at that. And they are really, really successful freelance writers, but you need to be able to kind of want to do all of that marketing and running around and getting all that done separate from just writing about stuff. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, it is.
And that to me is like the difference. I know I've seen some self-published authors who are really good at it because they are really good marketers and they get it out and they know how to get people's, and so in some ways this is great because they get to publish exactly what they want. And then there's the traditional that sometimes you talk about who maybe don't give you this, get back to you, or, it's like, we don't have to. And so it's finding that balance, I guess,
And I think it's changing. I think it's changing a lot. Like when you talk about self-publishing, when it started to become kind of a bigger deal, like in 2014, I think is the marker where they start talking about self-publishing being a bigger deal. And there's a lot of things you have to learn. It's an art, but it's also a job. I try to stress that to people. It is a job. So you have to learn how to do that job well. And at the same time, when you self-publish, because of what happened in self-publishing, there is, to your point with what you were going through in Hollywood, there is a lot of garbage, for lack of a better word, because the person didn't hone their craft, or they didn't get an editor, or they didn't, some part of it that they then just threw it out and is like, people should read my thing. And you're like, not in the condition it's in right now. People should not read your thing.
Right.
Okay. So let's talk about your writing process. So working previously in movies, doing journalism, which is a lot of research gathering. How do you write as a fiction writer now?
I usually have a general idea of the story I want to tell to start. Is that what you mean? That kind of the plotting part?
Start from the beginning. Yeah. Let's go through the whole thing together.
Yes. Well, that's what I'm going through on the next Destination Murder Mystery, which is Destination Monterey, which I'm working on right now. So I had a general idea of where I wanted to take the character. And, I have her working in her, having to write about her hometown area, which is not, as travel writers, you're like, oh, boring, but it's actually, you learn a lot, about where you are and about her background and things like that. So, and in some ways, because they're travel pieces, that kind of helped me a little bit, because it's like, okay, so let's take Monterey. She starts in Carmel Valley, Big Sur. Then I have her cycle back around over to Pacific Grove and Monterey, and then to Pebble Beach, and worked my story around the travel destinations that she's going to visit for the plotting out. And then with a mystery, you always kind of start, and I had heard this years ago, kind of start with the killer's confession and then work backwards a little bit, kind of in terms of who do I have, as the murderer, and how do we get there? But then there's still stuff that I'm in the process where I'm in that first draft. I'm almost to the end though. I'm very excited about that because
that's very exciting. For other reasons, I think that's very exciting. But
it's very exciting. The fun part is the rewriting for me. Once it's down, it's the same with the journalism stories. Once that horrible first draft is down, I'm a happy camper because I know I can finesse it to where it needs to go. But getting that, and I was kind of coming up with an analogy of it's like a big piece of marble. And the rough draft is I finally cut it out of the mountain, right? And it's like, oh my God. And now I can start whittling around and making it work. So at the moment, I have a lot of spots where it's like, more here, name here, you know, I mean, I have a lot of things that I'm going to need to fill in later, but I'm just trying to move the plot forward so that I can come back and fill in all the fun stuff.
So do you plot it out at all, or do you
I
just
do,
do an
yeah.
outline?
I do, yeah. I do the cards up on the wall, but certain sections were missing a little bit. I'm like, it's like, well, I'll figure that one out when I get there, kind of thing. So, but yeah.
I'm going to ask you, because you write mystery, which is a whole genre that I think is fascinating.
Yeah.
The whodunits. What made you decide to write mystery?
One of it is that I love mysteries. I absolutely love mysteries. And it's since, you know, a kid reading Nancy Drew's, right, and then Agatha Christie's, and then one of the things I did on my travels when I was working as a travel writer is whenever I would visit a city, I would find a local bookstore and pick up a mystery set in the bookstore, because mysteries tend to be about place. And so if you like, you know, so I would say a trip to Scotland and I'm in Edinburgh and I pick up an Ian Rankin book, reading it on the plane home, you get to visit all the places you just went. So that's really fun. But yeah, I'm not, you know, it's interesting when you look at it, it's like, why do we love, you know, knocking people off so much, you know, and killing them? But there is something about, I don't know.
The quote of the night. Why do we like killing people?
Why do we like killing people? But
well, see, I
death
write
is the
horror
only
thriller. I
question
have a
you can't
completely
answer.
different version of why I like killing people. It works out very well for me.
So, and then I think it's a big puzzle then, right? You know, you get to knock someone off and then you have to solve the puzzle of who did it. So that's fun.
Do you find, so one of the things I think is interesting for writers and is we have the whole thing in our brains. We have the universes, we have the multiple universes, if you're CR, like in our brains that are going in tandem that you pull stuff into. But with mystery, you have to give enough that people are along for the ride, but not too much that they've already figured it out
Right.
when they're doing it. How do you find that balance?
Well, because I and one of the things I did with Destination Maui is I had all the kind of breadcrumbs for who did it there. And then again, once I was doing some of those rewrites and going back and doing the second, third, and fourth drafts, is you go back and start throwing in little things, little clues to point to somebody else along the way. You know, so you have the through line of the main kind of story of who, you know, this guy killed this guy and this guy solved, right? But then you have all the other kind of, you know, things that you throw in to throw people off a little bit and do that along the way too. And in a way, it's similar for the romantic comedy, for the War Council, you know, because it's like, it's this Maggie wants to make love logical, so she creates the paramilitary relationship counselor like Mission Impossible, but then someone uses it against her. So that's your twist that you throw in to kind of to throw a monkey wrench into the whole thing. So
what was the most interesting part of you of getting a novel written and getting it published?
Wow, that's a really good question. I'm gonna see, are you want to answer?
I like asking interesting questions as I've been drinking.
My answers are never what you're going to expect because my whole thing is completely different. So I am not a good person to go off
Okay.
of.
I guess the validation. The validation is pretty cool. Because this is something I've always been a writer and I've always worked as a writer, but there is something about going, look, I did this, and being able to like, this is mine. I did this. If that makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
And you can do that in magazines. I mean, I've done that. Look, my story's in this magazine and it's on that shelf over there. That's really cool. But there's something about your book, you know, and it's similar to, again, when I was in film school and we made our student film, it's like, this is my baby. It's like you've given birth to something, you know what I mean? And it exists and it's born into the world. And now the interesting thing, though, is that happens. And then it's like, oh my God, now people are going to comment on it. No, wait, what? You know, so there's the mixed, you know.
And you're doing brilliant on the segues. Let's talk about people commenting on the book and reviewing it. Do you read your reviews?
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, I do. And it's funny because with the War Council, the very first person I got a a crazy person review. And it was almost like, and I was talking to Val at the time, I'm like, yeah, there was a part that was like, well, maybe we need to stop. We don't need to, this doesn't need to be published. This person didn't like it. Or, you know what I mean? She didn't get it. And then everything else was like, no, we like it. Like, okay, all right, okay. But it's hard a little bit. You know, you've put this thing out. And one of the nice things I will appreciate is writing for a publishing company where I'm writing a series is I've already moved on to the next one. Right. So I'm not as in, if I had only just published the War Council and then had to wait on the response and not have anything else coming up, I think that would have been a lot harder. But I was already moving on to Destination Maui, and now I'm already moving on to Destination Monterey. So I'm already in that other world. And it's like, oh, you enjoyed the book. That's great. I'm already thinking about the next one, which I actually really, for me, that's really good. And it's very similar to the magazine world where we just have an issue coming out. Well, I'm already on the next issue, you know, so I don't have to think.
No, it's true. And I think what you said, though, ties into the fact that I ask authors that question all the time, and I know how dangerous reviews are, because reviews are not very helpful most of the time. They're
Right.
just not a helpful communication to have. It's really great for somebody to go, oh my God, I love your book. Because you can also get those people that are like, oh my God, I love your book. And in their review, they completely explain all your plot lines.
Every single word.
Well, that again,
It's
this
like
one
they rewrote
person.
the mini version of your book, and they're like, oh my God, I love Destination Maui. And it was so cool that Bob was the killer.
Right, exactly.
And Bob's not the killer in Destination Maui, anybody listening, but like, it's one of those things where you're like, what in the fuck just happened?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and then at
You know?
the very end, they say, sorry for the spoilers. It's like, thanks.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you have to, it's great in a way, but in a way, I always tell authors, like, just stay the hell away from reviews.
Yeah.
You need them. You should find people to write them, but reading them, you can go down a rabbit hole of crazy. Like,
Right.
you really can go down a rabbit hole of crazy people who also don't get, like, I have a review on my book. I've talked about this before, where it's, the book is called My Home on Whore Island. And the review is from a guy who was like, this doesn't give enough tips on how to get laid. And I'm like, well, this is
Wasn't
not
a
a
how-to
how-to
book.
manual. That's not what
This isn't getting laid for dummies. This is
yeah,
That's a real estate
exactly
ad,
it.
yeah.
But he gave me 3 stars, but was not happy with the fact that he wasn't able to get laid. He's like, women can probably get laid using this book, but guys will. And I'm like, how the hell from reading this did you think that this was going to be a manual on how you get laid more? And I'm like, you're a delight. You're a delight to be around. My first review, I have to say, my first review I ever got was on a short story. Are you hearing me, Chelsea? Short story that I wrote.
What is
And
a short
this
story?
short story is called Jimmy. And needless to say, it's a thriller horror story. And it's about, it starts off with a kid who wakes up in a bed. He's a teenager who had tried to kill himself and was not successful. And it goes through a bunch of scary stuff. But literally the review said, Erica Lance promotes suicide. And I was like, okay, I'm done with reviews at this point in time. The person, like, she reviewed every single story in the book. And what was funny was the one person who had submitted their story that was in the anthology, it was supposed to be a 5,000 word story, I think, or 10,000 maybe. And she had submitted 25,000 words, and the editor had to cut her 25,000 word story down to 10,000 words. Got the best review of everybody, and hers was the most complex to follow. And I'm like, not reading reviews anymore. I'm super done now. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I think the hard part is when you get reviews in your inbox, but you can't get the people to go back and actually leave reviews for you.
That I've gotten that.
I get it
a ton.
all the time.
Yes.
They're like,
I keep
oh, it was
going,
great. And then they go through and you're just like, awesome. Thank you. Will you just hop on over to like this website and just copy and paste?
That's what
just
I tell
copy
them.
and paste.
Yeah, I'm like, all you have to do is copy those 2 sentences you wrote me and put it on Amazon. That would help a lot. Because yeah, I'd get that a lot. Yeah. Yes.
So, what kind of feedback have you gotten from fans? You just said you got email, but how has that been? Getting feedback?
It's been delightful. It is really fun. It's really fun when people enjoy what you've written, and yeah, no, I and it's fun being able to, and it's funny because one of my favorite authors was Sue Grafton. I don't know if you guys ever read Sue Grafton stuff, but I just loved her stuff. And I kind of remember she had this salon decades ago, it was a while ago, but and we all sat in there and everybody could talk about the books because we all knew them as well. And it's neat that you create these worlds that people talk to you as if they're real people, like there's a character in Destination Maui that our lead character gal Sam kind of starts up a budding romance with this Maui detective. And when I'll say to people, it's like, well, what do you think about bringing Roger back? Oh, I love Roger. You're like, okay, I'm glad I created a guy that you actually really like. Okay, that's good. Okay. So that's fun. Yeah.
I have to ask this because I think it's very funny. This happened to me, but has anybody talk to you about one of your characters that was just literally like a plot point, like a launch point? They weren't actually intended to be anything other than like the barista in the coffee shop that somebody comes and picks up a coffee so they can move on to their
Nice, yeah.
whatever was actually happening in the story. Has anybody brought things like that up to you?
No, but there's one character that I introduced in Destination Maui that I actually had been planning to kill. I made her as annoying as possible and was going to kill her off in the next book. And then I actually became it's like, she's kind of fun as a foil because she's so annoying. So I might have to keep her around a little bit. So yeah. So sometimes there's that, it's like, oh, okay. I sometimes that is the hard part with a mystery. It's like you aren't killing, and it's like it's fictional, but you still feel bad killing people off a little bit sometimes, It's like
you're talking the wrong
So
person.
it's not like the
literally zero problem killing people. So
half the people in my books die.
So everybody run out and read our books. Get invested in the characters.
Exactly. And then boom, gone.
Yeah. I had a review one time that actually is my favorite review, which said Erica Lance is an author that likes to punch you in the fucking face. Like
Nice.
They literally wrote that. I mean, fucking was, asterisks and other things like that. And I was like, cool. Well, that worked. That
nice.
had the right effect that was
Take it
happening.
as
So
you
what has
will.
been your most fun interaction with a fan?
It was like my dad's cousin's wife, and it was one of those where I said, oh, I have a book that came out, the War Council came out. It was so cute. It's like, oh, that's great. And then I was up in Carmel doing research on the other book, and they were there. So I said, oh, I'll come over. And I thought, well, I'll bring her the book. And I walk in and she had bought 8 copies and was having me sign them for all of her friends and family. And I'm like, that was just the sweetest thing. That was just so sweet that she had cared enough to like buy all those copies and then it wanted me to sign each one with a different thing to different people. And that just was a great thing. So at that point, it's still family member.
You autograph books, you have made it as an author.
Exactly.
Dun, dun, dun.
Exactly.
I think it's amazing. I love it that fans, like you said, get invested in the world. And that's the thing is fans truly get immersed and they identify with some characters in it or something like that resonates with their life. And then they tell you about it because they talk about writing being such a solitary thing. But I think that takes it out of being a solitary thing when you can interact with somebody who just, thoroughly loves some aspect. And then they're thrilled that you're doing that. Like, I bet she was absolutely thrilled that you were signing books to her friends. And you have to think what she said to them. She wasn't just like, Anne was up for the weekend. I got her to sign some shit. I'm sure that's not how that went at all.
Well, especially because, as the War Council, but it's about love. And it's kind of looking at all the different aspects of love in a very humorous way. But she's like, oh, I have this one friend who's going a lot. She's going to really need this or something. It was like, okay, good. I'm glad you think it'll help.
Oh my God, that's so much fun. That's so much fun. Okay.
Yeah,
so let's talk about where you write. So you've been writing for a long time. Like, I'm assuming you did a lot of writing and stuff like that on the road when you were traveling. You travel writing. What about your fiction writing? What is your writing setup when you're writing your stories?
Well, we have a home office. I have a home office. And I'm really, really good. The mornings are my most productive time. I'm an early riser, and I'm probably at the computer by 7:30, 8 o'clock. And I'm just, afternoons I am useless. So it's like, so the mornings are my
So
best
you go wrestling. Like, that's what you do in the
I'm
afternoon.
not Garp, but yeah.
That would be the best story. I write, cozy mysteries and romantic stories, and then I wrestle in the afternoon. I think that would be amazing.
No. So I've learned that I'm good in the morning. Yeah. So, but sometimes also late afternoon is also a time, I think sometimes when that's more like a pen and a paper, just sitting somewhere, but kind of writing down plot ideas or things I need to add the next morning or things like that. But kind of the nuts and bolts is the morning at the computer. And sometimes I sneak away. I have an uncle who has a place up in Carmel, which I've stayed at when I was, doing some research for Destination Maui, because it starts in Carmel. But it's also good to just go away to another house sometimes and have 4 different walls and not have a husband and 2 cats coming in and asking you questions when you're right in the middle of a scene and things like that. So,
Well, then I was going to ask you, does it need to be quiet? What is your writing like?
It doesn't have to be completely quiet. Every once in a while, though, I need to escape and have 24 hours where I'm in the world for a few days, where that's all I think. I mean, as you guys know, it's like, and this is kind of a weird and cool thing about writing fiction, is that you don't live in your own life all the time. You're living in this other world in addition to, so it's like, everyone's like, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. It's like, I'm trying to get Sam off this cliff, it's like,
I have bigger things to deal with.
It's like, I'm trying to figure out if the car falls off or if she pulls her out in time, what's going to happen here? So it's like, you're living in this other world, and every once in a while I escape, find a place away for a few days and just go be there and do nothing but eat, sleep, and drink, that story. So every once in a while I need this. Sometimes you need to me, those are kind of, like boot camp, writing boot camp a little bit, I guess you would describe it.
I think, people talk about writers' retreats, and I think you can go places that have quote unquote writers' retreats and stuff like that. But I think sometimes if you get an opportunity to go to a place, whether your thing is a forest or a beach or just a motel down the road, because you just need to be alone with your thoughts and not have distractions, I think that can be brilliant for authors. Or if you're going to go visit family that have a cabin somewhere or whatever it is, or fly to New York and stay in, a hotel with the city streets going on outside the window and things like, whatever it is that will, your happy place for writing. I think you definitely should take advantage of that.
Yeah. No, I think that's helped immeasurably whenever I've done that, and that was actually how I decided to pull the War Council off the shelf and do it, is like, I really need to figure out what I want to do. My job just ended. And so I booked an Airbnb up in the Malibu Hills near here, and was up in this little cottage for 3 days and just pulled it out. It's like, oh, I think this is going to work. Let me pull this out and start working on this. But it's just getting away from your everyday life and not having the distractions of everyday life, because there's nothing else to do too, which is good. It's like, okay, I can't decide, that area needs cleaning, or I should fix that, or, let's do over this. And so I definitely think finding those places where you can just disappear into the world for a while is really helpful.
Makes sense.
So you don't do music?
You're doing 2 series. I know you only have book 1 and book 1 on each of the series, but have you created a sort of a world Bible for yourself of the characters and things you've already talked to? How are you doing that with writing book 2? As you're going into it, how do you keep track of what you already did?
More for the mystery, I think, because it is kind of based on some of my trips that I've taken over the years. I'm still kind of pondering how to turn, because when I originally wrote the War Council, it wasn't intended as a series. So although I'm starting to come up with some ideas, I'm like, okay, we can take maybe those characters or move that and come up with something fun with that. So not as much as some people do, I don't think. Yeah.
No, I mean,
you have a question, CR?
Oh, I was just saying, like, you don't write with music or anything?
I actually really like silence. I actually, I know some people do. I just love silence. Sometimes, every once in a while. Yeah.
I like how she's shaking her head like,
I know,
I'm sorry,
I know.
I have to have very loud music all the time.
I
That what
do.
you have?
Like, I have my earbuds in, and like when my husband walks by, he's just like, "Can you hear me?" And I'm like, "I have it in." He's like, "No, when you take them out, can you like hear anything?" I'm like, "Of course I can."
No, every author's process is different. It's kind of amazing. Okay, Ciara, I'm going to give you the last question before the end of this podcast. No pressure, but complete pressure.
You
Better be
always
good.
do this.
I know. I don't know why you're not prepared
I
for
will
it.
say, when I
because
wrote
do.
the first,
Because
When I wrote the
normally
first-
it's
I was just gonna say, when I wrote the first draft of War Counseling a couple of decades ago, I listened to the soundtrack to Hair. I don't know why, but it
Oh,
totally,
wow.
yeah, that totally, like, for some reason, that was that world to me, was this crazy world of
the
people.
soundtrack of the Hair. What is
Hair,
that?
there's a musical called Hair.
Oh, I don't do musicals. Okay. I
Well,
don't feel
yeah,
so
and it was a
off
movie. It was
balance
a
now.
movie. It was a movie too. Watch the movie.
Gotcha.
It's fun. It's a great movie.
I am so bad with musicals. I hate them. Like, I won't watch the Phantom of the Opera. I don't do
Oh,
any
no,
of that
Phantom-
stuff.
Yeah,
Like, it
Phantom
just-
sucks. No, Phantom
You
sucks.
don't randomly break out into song and choreograph perfectly, and it just really irks.
Okay, I don't know how we're friends, but can you please ask the question before that's no longer the case? Okay? Hair is an amazing musical.
Hair
All
is really cool.
musicals are amazing. Moving on.
Okay. So now you said that you weren't planning to do a series. Now, when you said that, were you talking about both of them? Like, you had no intention to do a series, period, and you just wanted to do a bunch of individual books?
No, yeah, the War Council I wrote just to be an individual book. And then when Four Horsemen Publications was interested in the War Council, and they said, we really love series, I said, well, that's good, because I'm already working on this mystery series. So that worked out. So the mystery series I had always envisioned as a series. Again, I kind of wanted to, I love the Sue Grafton alphabet mystery series with the Kinsey Milhone, and I just love those books. So it's, to me, I want it to be like that. The War Council, the romantic comedy, I just hadn't thought of it. I thought of it as a one-off. So now I'm having to figure out how to turn that into a series. But it's a romantic comedy, so anything's possible.
That's very true. That is very true.
Very true. See, look, you made it through that last question. Don't talk about musicals anymore before the end of this podcast. And as we're wrapping up, what advice would you give to authors out there?
Just keep writing. Just if you want to write. And to me, anytime you put words on a page, you're writing. So, or whether it's an email and writing your thoughts, or a journal, or whatever it is, but and it's whether it's magazines or books or everything, it's just writing is practice. It's doing it every single day. And I think that just keep writing. That would be my advice.
I love it. Okay, tell people how to find your books.
You can find my books, at annshepphird.com, spelled weird. So my last name is spelled Shepphird, which means I had a very bad spelling ancestor when they came over to America. So annshepphird.com, or they're on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, or go to your independent bookstore and give them my name and they should come up.
Very, very cool. It was wonderful having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed myself. Went by very quickly.
Yes, good conversation does. Dun, 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 dun. And all fanciness. Okay, this has been the Drinking with Authors podcast. I've been your host, Erica Lance. My co-host has been C.R. Rice. Our sponsor has been Skunk Brothers Spirits, DWA 10. If you want a coupon code, they have amazing stuff. And our guest has been Ann Shepphird. And we will see you guys next time.